and then I'll just hand it over to Wolfgang.
Yeah, so thanks, Danny, for inviting me. Of course, I would have preferred to come to Amsterdam because I've never been there. And we have many contacts to the Dutch community already. And we have some members from the Netherlands. You might know them and so on. So there is already a good connection to the Netherlands. However, I've never been to Amsterdam. So that's a pity. However, so let's make the best out of Corona. And let's start, right? I really like to show this picture at the beginning of conference talks, right? That's the application landscape of an existing medium or large sized enterprise. And the boxes are the applications and the interfaces, and the lines are the interfaces, right? And even after 40 years of Zachman, enterprise architecture, TOGAF, and the whole discipline, I don't know many companies where the situation is much better. And I see this in each and every of my assignments. And so the sad thing, if we see it from an enterprise architecture perspective, is what have we been doing for these 4 decades, right? What impact did we have on this mess in this application landscape? So, and that's really a question that bothers me a lot. And that's the reason why I started 3 years ago. I started with architectural thinking, and now we're moving in the direction of enterprise design. I will talk about it.
Ik heb mijn telefoon staan.
Okay, yes, and so the question is, why is it? And I have some reasons, but maybe the more interesting reason is, what should we do against this mess, right? And that's maybe motivation also for the remainder of my presentation. And in many of my talks and Milan's talks, we talk about, and we start with asking people, why is Amazon so successful? And why does everybody buy on Amazon? And we usually do this using a poll. Today, I just collected the answers we typically get, right? So if you ask enterprise architects or maybe software architects, the first answer would maybe be microservices. Yeah, it's microservices, and that's why they are successful. But of course, we know that's not it, right? And if you talk to the brand designer world, they say, well, they have really established a strong brand, and they have a cool branding, and they have a clear vision. Yeah, and then some people say it's all about leadership, and Steve Bezos is a visionary leader like hell. For sure, it is. Right? But they are also doing some pretty boring stuff. They do some really old school stuff, like they optimize their processes. So that's good old business process reengineering. They automate their logistics, and you know what they are doing in their data warehouses and so on. And today, with digital transformation, many people say customer first, customer orientation, right? We addiction, do everything for the customer, and the rest will follow. So, and if you have a look at these ideas, it becomes obvious that successful enterprises can't be designed from one or only one perspective, like only from the process point of view, or only by the software architect's point of view. Efficient and better enterprises, that's the vision of our association, must be architected, must be designed in our terminology, seen from different facets. And these are the icons. And as you can see, I'm working together with some really, maybe with the best graphics designer we have on this planet. So expect our work to be really beautiful, because beauty is a key for us. We believe that the only way to make this collaborative enterprise design approach happen, it's about beauty. And these beautiful icons, they have been created by Dennis, he's our art director. However, they stand for certain facets of enterprise design. That's very important. So for example, the blue house here, that's architecture, right? That's where we are coming from. That's where we say, okay, it's about structure, and we have applications and IT components and relations, and everything is rational and everything is structured. That's the world where I'm coming from. And 3 years ago, I met Milan, and it changed my mind completely, as we will see in the remainder of the presentation. And then we have the green one. That's the identity of the company. What's our purpose? What are we for? What's our place in community? And the red one is experience. So in our point of view, we must change one thing. Yeah, we think that enterprises must shift from this constant fixing. Yeah, companies are most I see in this constant watching mode. There's a new disruptor and there's a problem in the logistics system we need to constantly fix, and then the next fix, and this short-term watching, that's prevalent in these days. And we need a new product tomorrow because there's a new competition, right? Fixing. And we want to change it. The company enterprises start the intentionally designing of the becoming. It's a process. Companies must understand that they can and should design their becoming. And it's not this reactive reaction of some drivers, and there's a new competitor, there's a new technology, and we need blockchain, and we need microservices, right? Companies are driven so much by fads and by dynamics and short-term thinking. I mean, that's, for me, it's obvious. For many enterprise architects, it's obvious. But if you show this to the product people, they say, no, but I don't understand the problem. It's gone. Okay. Yeah, so the million-dollar question is how to do it, right? And that's, there's still an echo. Someone to mute. Now it's gone. Yes, okay. So how to do it, yeah, and that's the main part of my presentation, of course. And as Danny mentioned in the introduction, I'm one of two presidents of the Intersection group, and we are a not-for-profit association. We have now 70 members and a huge community. And together, we are about to publish the first version of the Intersection Toolkit. And that's what I'm talking about. So that's what I present today is just a version 0.1 maybe, but there are some conceptual foundations in there already. And yeah, and so let's discuss them. The beautiful icon I showed you at the beginning, for us, we call them facets, right? And there's the blue one, the blue facet, that's where we are coming from. That's the architecture, that's the rational part, that's application, that's capabilities, that's this typical artifacts enterprise architects deal with, right? Technology, application, information entities, and that very much in a structured way. And in the red one, that's the experience world, right? So if I show you the solution of this little quiz here, then it becomes more passionate. That's why it's red, right? It's about experience. It's about asking, enterprise should ask themselves, what is our role in people's life? What value do we create for people? How can we make the best possible experiences? And when you work in IT, you might already have recognized that there's a kind of a strange tension typically between the user experience designers, the customer, the product people, and the IT guys. So there's still this huge gap between designers that want to have everything beautiful and for the customer and the best experience. And then you have the IT people that say, well, that's not feasible because we are the feasibility guys, right? We must make it work. And that's true. I'm coming from this direction. And and that's what we're doing in the Intersection group. If you discuss with people, coming from both sides, we discussing these purple intersections. That's what we call the overlaps between the circles, right? Awesome things happen. They don't even understand architecture. They don't know what a relation is between elements. They don't understand our rational thinking. And quite often they do not connect to our concepts. They don't connect to capabilities and processes and information architecture modeling. It's absent there. It shouldn't, because of course information is part of the experience, but in reality, user experience people are not skilled data modelers, information modelers also. Yeah, and then we have this green facet here. That's this purpose thing, right? So that's where mission comes into play. Who are we? Why do we exist? So that's close to purpose. What's the role in society? Why do we make this a better planet? So that's the purpose, the mission. And of course, the architecture should be driven by mission and by drivers that come from society or from market or from a visionary. Yeah, like you have Steve Jobs, and he had a clear vision and he gave Apple a clear purpose, and that's in this green field. And as I mentioned before, the real magic happens in the intersection, and they are really important for our work. And in these intersections, we have product, right? So at the end, all we do as an enterprise is creating product. We have people, we have an organization, we have processes, we have IT system, we have building architecture, we have structures, we have all kinds of resources only to create products. And capabilities, as we will see later, is a key concept there to connect that. And on the other hand, we have this experience-based view on products. And in our community, we have several people that come from these product designers. And even after 2 years working with them, they are still alien to me. It's hard for me to explain them the concepts of capabilities, for example, or the concepts of information architecture modeling. They don't understand modularity and why not everybody they envision is feasible and such things. And with Intersection Group, and that's maybe one of the mission of our association, is that we want to bring these people from various disciplines to these intersections and come up with concepts that are able to glue the prevalent bodies of knowledge like TOGAF or Archimate in the architecture space, and their customer journeys, and maybe top task and other methods coming from different communities. And I was quite astounded when I did a Google on LinkedIn. So I searched for how many people call themselves enterprise architects, and there are only 40,000 worldwide on LinkedIn. The user experience people are 10 times as many, and there are 100 times as many project managers. So we must be aware that we as enterprise architects are not the center of the universe. We are a tiny community, and many people, and the majority of people, don't really understand what we are doing, and we are not good in making this connection. And that's the reason with Intersection Group why we focus exactly on this pain point, where we say, okay, we must make the combination between architecture and experience, and it has to do with product design. So we run workshops and we run webinars where we foster these discussions between UX people and architecture people, for example. Yeah, and then we have this organization intersection. That's a tough one, right? We have some people coming, they call themselves organization designers. I've never heard that this is a discipline, right? So these are the guys, they are much closer to the C-suite. They're the guys that write the org chart and the role descriptions. I mean, you usually are in touch with them, but you never work together with them. They are far away. Somebody else does the organization. We are enterprise architects, yes, but we don't have any impact on organization design. That's a pity. How can we say that's enterprise design? And they have the concepts. I've read some books from Naomi Steinfeld. I can point you to, and they have so many similar ideas, but they lack fundamental understanding of architectural structures these days. They have concepts like processes, but they don't understand sustainable architectures, modularity. But how can you design an organization if you don't understand relation between people and systems and so on? So that they are also fools with blind spots, the same as we as enterprise architects. Yeah, and then we have the orange one. That's about the branding. It's a discipline, it's a standalone discipline. I've seen talks from brand designers. They see the company from this outside in. How are we perceived? What values do we represent? And you can imagine, if you have a look at the Amazon example, what would happen to the brand of Amazon if it won't be able to deliver next day? So what would happen to the brand when Amazon has problems with the logistics? The brand is demolished, it's gone, right? So there is this intersection and there is this overlap between architecture and branding, but they don't see it. They don't understand what we enterprise architects do for the brands. Maybe they understand products and brands, that's related, but brand and product and architecture, not so much. Yeah, so that's maybe one of the messages is with intersection and with enterprise design, we enlarge the scope, we want to have a more holistic picture on the enterprise. And we see these 3 circles, we call them facets. Yeah, you can say that's like a lens. Yeah, it's like a lens. And then you can say, well, let's have a look at the architecture of your company. And then you take a different lens. What does this architecture mean for the identity? And that's what our toolkit wants to do. It wants to enable different view angles and foster the intersections and foster interdisciplinary concepts. And I'm an enterprise architect, yeah, and it took me 1 year to discuss with Milan, he's the second president, that we need relations and that we need elements. So what you see is the meta model. And I said, Milan, we need a meta model. He said, no, we don't need one. There are elements and we don't need these strict lines. I said, we do need it because that's mandatory, because then we know that as architects, right? Then you can say, okay, I have this process and what product does it produce? Yeah, we can go across this line. So we architects, we work with entities and relationships. That's what we're doing. But we must be aware that's totally unfamiliar outside this tiny architecture of Ivory Tower. And for the very first time, and I'm quite proud of that, somebody from the designer community said, okay, we need architecture. We need architectural thinking, not only in the architecture space. We need the experienced people to understand that there's a relation between their customer journeys and the product, and a relation from the, I can take the finger, right? From the journey to the product to the process. Yeah, for us, that's quite obvious. And I don't need to explain to enterprise architects why relations are important. But whenever I discuss with other guys, that's really, really hard. And they really don't like this picture. So I show this only to nerds like you and me. I don't show it to the designer world. But that will be a process, right? And we want to teach them architectural thinking. For example, we want to teach the journey people, the user experience people, good old information entity modeling. Yeah, that's a concept coming from software, entities and relation. Later it was object-oriented, business object modeling. And these concepts, that's 40 years old. It's totally absent in the business side. That's for me, that's, I don't know, where we must teach them, and we will teach them that they should start, for example, thinking in objects, information objects and their relations, even in the journey path. And so, yeah, and so that's the meta model. And as you can see, it is much, much simpler than what you know is in TOGAF and in Archimed. Yeah, and I'm honest, it's not the complete one. So what you see here, that's only what we call the core elements. And the core elements are those elements we say that all disciplines must know them and must understand the relations, right? And what's missing, of course, for IT people are applications, informations, and such things that are closer to IT. And that's the reason why we make a clear distinction between the core elements you see here and extended elements. There are also extended elements in the user experience field, and there are extended elements in the identity in the green field. Maybe we are not finished with them yet, but with IT, I think we are pretty far, and I will show you. And at the beginning, when I met Milan two years ago, approximately, for me, this was really alien. It was really this high level, and said, yeah, Milan, that's really awesome. I agree, we need to have a more holistic point of view, but that's much too far away from reality. Today, I'm living in this bloody reality of IT transformation projects. That's where I'm coming from, right? And we all deal with this technical legacy, and we have design challenges, right? We need to manage an application portfolio. We need to migrate SAP systems and huge merger with enormous complexity. So I'm coming from this world. I've felt this pain. We are all desperate in the software field. We know the modularization is weak and the legacy structures. And there's so much pressure coming from the product field, right? We must have better products, right? But the legacy is still there, and we feel the pain. That's tough. And so at the beginning, I said to Milan, well, that's utterly naive. Your vision with strategic enterprise design, I don't buy this story because it's so far away from my reality. I agree that companies must have a purpose. I agree that we must have better user experiences. Who can doubt that? You cannot doubt that, of course, yeah. but what's the bridge from where we are to the new world, to a more holistic strategic enterprise design? And after some months, we came up with the concepts, we call them design challenges. And design challenges are segments, are more specific focuses that take people from their reality. And for example, this IT application portfolio design challenge, that's what I'll be talking about in the next couple of minutes. That's enterprise architecture, at least in my point of view. It's the IT-ish, it's the IT application connected to capability. So this classical enterprise architecture task. And it's one of, today we have 7, maybe we have more soon. We are not, that's not finished yet, probably. But what you can see is, yes, we want to nudge people to a more strategic, more holistic strategic enterprise design level, where people learn to balance all these facets, where they can get out of the ivory towers, where we say, okay, IT guys, it's not all about microservices. It's not all about software. Please talk to the product guys and talk to them. Well, that's mandatory, of course, and doesn't happen. Usually they don't speak the same language, and we must make this intersection. Yeah, and that's the idea of this specific design challenges. We want to take people from where they are, from their typically bloody reality. Everybody's frustrated. I talked to so many people. All of those disciplines are frustrated because they're not connected with each other, not well. If you read books from other disciplines, it becomes obvious how big the gaps between those specialized disciplines are. And yeah, this is maybe one of my last ugly slides because I created it. We are not done with the better graphics there. What does it mean to be a design challenge? Well, as you can see here, I added 3 elements to the meta model and applications. Of course, for me, that was always the center of the focus of enterprise architecture management. It should always have been called application portfolio management. We've never really designed capabilities. Maybe we've facilitated a bit. We've never really designed processes. The process people did it. And all we did is align technology and applications to business structures. Yeah, that's what we're doing. And so is there a question?
No, I propose we all wait with questions until after the presentation will
Okay,
go on. So,
cool. Yeah, just there was a bit of an echo. Yeah, and that's what we see as design challenges, right? You start with an element that is today the focal point of a certain discipline application, and then you see, okay, what relations do we need? What other elements shall we deal with in this design challenge? And that's what enterprise architects are doing. Have a look at the application portfolio related to some business architecture concepts, capabilities, processes. Information might be interesting. Information is in the center for us in the current draft. We are still discussing, but of course you cannot do IT transformation or IT application portfolio design without having information as one of the elements. Yeah. But information for us, it's not part of the architecture. We're having hard discussions where to put it. It's everywhere, right? It's also in the user experience. Everything is information. Everything in reality is somewhere in a database. It's somewhere in the communication, and it's a very special element. And we are not maybe finished with where to put it right now. We have it in the center, might change. Let's see. Yeah, and so that's the design challenge. And by the end of this year, as I mentioned, we will have Intersection Toolkit version 1.0 ready. And with that, probably a quite good version of this design challenge. So expect us to have the design challenge strategic enterprise design, where we have tools and maps for the holistic challenge. And we for sure will have some maps and tools for this IT challenge, and we will have a seamless connection with them. That's the idea. So yeah, should have everything that TOGAF has. So I'm not sure if anything would be missing. However, let's see. And that is the big picture of our toolkit. And it's no coincidence that that's also our logo, because we love this infinite loop. And you can see it as phases, or you can see it as pointing with your finger to the center, and that's the shared understanding. Yeah, we want to have the center of all we do is that many people in business and IT have a shared understanding of the processes and IT and capabilities and the brand. That's a huge topic today. The enterprise architecture models live in the tiny enterprise architecture world only, most often. But for example, we want to have a company-wide information entity model, because that's part of this shared understanding in the blue circle, probably, right? So that's us in the center, if you want. And then what we do, we can do an exploration, right? We can have a look, okay, what's the design challenge at hand? Maybe there's a merger. Somebody made a decision and there's a big merger between two banks or something like that. And it always starts with an exploration phase, like a concept, pre-design phase, for example, context assessment. And we will have some tools for that. And then if I understood enough about the exploration, the context, assessment in various disciplines, I will talk about that later, the next phase we call co-design. And I fought hard to have this co in the name of this phase. So it's about bringing people from various disciplines together in a room, run a design sprint. That's a workshop format that comes from designer world, and it's really powerful. Maybe we'll have other workshop formats. So what happens in this co-design is that we want to set up negotiation spaces. So we bring in IT guys, and we bring in the product people, and maybe some executives and business experts, right? So you must have an interdisciplinary group of people coming up with scenarios, possible scenarios for addressing this design challenge. And then this group of people comes up with a set of scenarios, and then it's time to invest and to make decisions, right? And then you go back to the center of this loop and you say, okay, what do we have? Really cool scenarios there. That's cool. We have option one, but that's too expensive maybe, but it's better for the user experience. And we have option two that has the best product, but we are not sure if we are capable of doing it and so on. So you know that, yeah, you always have scenarios, like also we have them in enterprise architecture, and somebody must make a decision. And we call this phase investment in change. So that's where we must ensure that enterprise design is connected with the financial processes, with the investment processes, because I don't know if some of you already read Chris Bott's book. I can send you the link afterwards. He coined this term. We must learn to invest in the best possible changes. That means we must first understand who we are and what we are capable of doing, and we must explore. But once we have, enterprise design or enterprise architecture is such a powerful tool to help people make better informed decisions. So the center is very much about decision making. It's about making big decisions done by board. It's about making smaller decisions by autonomous teams and those stuff. And the right side of the loop, that's where it comes to transformation. That's where we actually build or transform something, the realization, right? Where we implement a piece of software maybe, or we build a shop. It's not only about software. We can also build a plant or a factory, however. So it's realization for us means we are not happy only to design some PowerPoint slides and come up with some high-level glossy concepts. That happens all too often. With Intersection, we are only happy if we make the connection to the realization teams, right? You have these hundreds of Scrum teams, and enterprise architecture has been struggling connecting with them. That's a big area of tension. How can we be in the solution teams? They want to be autonomous. They don't want to connect with the enterprise. Typically, they have a product owner, they follow them blindly and so on. That's a huge area of tension in the realization phase we need to tackle. And we believe that's only possible to have the shared understanding, and the clear vision helps in this alignment. Yeah, and then the fifth phase, it's about reuse. That's a clear commitment that we believe in reusable frameworks, reusable patterns, reusable principles. I will talk about this also in a few minutes' time. Yeah, and the cool thing with this loop is you can travel the loop at various speeds, right? So if you have a large transformation, you will have maybe 1 year of exploration before you start the co-design of a merger between two banks. A lot of things must be analyzed. What's the best way to merge these two companies? And then you go to the center and you make a 100 million euro decision, big decisions. And then you start a realization that takes years and so on. So that's this slow and large loop, but it's the same loop. Yeah. And if you have smaller design challenges that happen in realization teams, or you want to run an experiment, right? Let's make a short prototype if we can use artificial intelligence for a bank, for example. There are thousands of loops going on in an enterprise in parallel. Some of them are slow, others are quite fast, right? But with this investment in change, they are all connected to the shared understanding, and they are all connected to the same governance, for example. We will talk about that also later. Yeah, and so that these are the phases, and we will have this as the framework or the structure of all of our tools. So you will see that we will come up with maps. I will talk about this in a second. So that maps that support all of these phases and patterns and personal skills. That's a big topic also, because enterprise design is also a soft discipline. Enterprise architects are not always that good in personal skills, like listening, asking the right questions, facilitating workshops, gaining trust. So there's a lot also in our books about these personal skills. So I would say these underpin this continuous loop, and we will have tools and we will have trainings ready, and let's see what we will have next year, but the tools will be ready for version 1.0 by end of this year, but we will also have trainings over time in these disciplines. Yeah, and the maps topic, that's a difficult one, because each and every discipline has their own maps, yeah, and capabilities. They are so big in enterprise and business architecture. Information objects, they are a bit old school. Some people say we don't need them. We believe we do need them. And processes, right? Enterprise architecture typically don't own the processes. There are business analysts and process management departments, right? And then we have these newer approaches coming from UX customer journeys. And many people are already discussing how to better connect these customer journey maps with process maps. There's a lot of stuff going on between the BABOK, the Business Architecture Guild, and the IIBA, for example, connecting those worlds. So that's quite promising already. But with enterprise design, what we say, yeah, that's cool. There will be several maps, specialized maps. But what we want to achieve is to come up with a single, I call it enterprise core map, the shared understanding. I see this as a hologram, in that case, the elephant, right? So at the end, the vision is to have a model that is easy to understand by everybody. So otherwise you never get a shared understanding. So it must be a simple map. It must have clear terms. It must be able, you must be able to zoom in and zoom out. You must be able maybe to rotate it like on an iPhone. Yeah, so that's the enterprise in one model. And if you want to have more specialized information, you can drill into it and have a look at the applications, for example. There's an application, this typical application per capability maps. That will be in the toolkit. So that's good old enterprise architecture. All people do it in a similar way. This application portfolio management, where you relate to the elephant, right? Which IT applications do I need for the ear, for example? And the same is true for other maps as well. So we still believe that it's possible to have something like an enterprise core map that is maybe kind of a center or the glue of maps coming from various disciplines. But the only way, and that's really a tough challenge, is to discuss it with these various disciplines. That's tough, right? Because, yeah, I have customer journeys, only journeys. But and if I tell them, well, where is the information model? Do you deal with which information objects are needed in these customer journeys? They don't do it. They don't care about information modeling, modularization. Or if you talk to them, maybe your journey doesn't work because our data in our existing applications is not good enough. They don't want to listen. because we need the customer journey, right? And if you've ever been the only enterprise architecture in a design thinking workshop or something like that, you're always the person who says, no, it doesn't work. And with architectural thinking and with enterprise design, we want to foster a better understanding of feasibility also to the UX people. So they must know why something is not feasible, at least to some degree. There will always be the IT guys. But there's a total naive view on structure and on architecture in most communities. They don't think architecturally. And if we as a small, tiny community are the only ones that do that, won't work as today. And we want to change that, coming up with a toolkit where disciplines love to connect. So we have the approach that we want to see the UX guys and the thought leaders from UX and the thought leaders from org design and the thought leaders from brand design think, hey, Intersection Toolkit, that's cool. I want to connect with my concepts to them. Yeah, it's like a platform where we want those disciplines to connect to our concepts. Yeah, and the first step in the loop, and you see it on top here, it's the exploration phase. And there are already some tools coming more from strategic enterprise design. That's more Milan's work, right? So there are already some questionnaires and some research questionnaires, right, where you look at the enterprise as a whole. So there are tools. When Milan has a new assignment, he doesn't know what's the problem all about. So he has a new company, and the first question is to find out, is it a problem of the brand? Is it a problem of the experience? Is it an IT or an architectural problem? So what is typically the initial pitch is not the actual problem. Whenever somebody, when I have had many assignments where people told me, I have a problem with the IT, and at the end, it was a problem, a deep problem in organization and in processes. That's quite often the case. So with this questionnaire, we want to nudge people to a broader view. Is it really an architectural problem? Can we really create these products on a high level, yeah, to do an exploration, what is the problem at hand? And on the right side of this slide, we will have more specific research and assessment tools. So as mentioned, we don't only have the strategic enterprise design challenge, we also have these more specific ones. And the bottom right, that's a typical assessment I do when I make an assessment of IT. So if somebody tells me, I have a problem with my IT applications, I have some tools and some questionnaires to find out and to make an assessment of the most important applications and rate them. And that's where good old application portfolio design, right? And there can be similar tools coming from other disciplines, and they are related, of course, to strategic enterprise design. But it will be tough to bring those together, and it can only be done with our interdisciplinary members, of course. And if you see these pictures, you can imagine that's the designer's world. I'm coming from this IT background, and I was always a bit hesitant and a bit clumsy in these design thinking workshops. And now I have pen and I do some handicrafts and some Lego serious play. And then that's the world of the designers. And we want to encourage also the more rational guys like myself, right? To get better drawers, to get better facilitators, to be more active in those workshops, right? And to use the tools, these creativity tools, design thinking, design sprints, live sketching, facilitation is a big issue in this co-design space. So it's not so much about I'm the enterprise architect and I think, and after some thoughts and months of modularization, I write down the enterprise architecture because I'm the architect. What we are about to design with this toolkit is co-design. It's co-architecture at the end, but also co-design. So we believe that the wisdom you need for the enterprise design is spread across the enterprise. There are maybe hundreds of people that have the wisdom you need for this enterprise design. A single enterprise architect can do it. Of course he cannot, because there's so much business knowledge you need. You need some visionaries and so on. And with this design sprint idea, with this different workshops formats coming from the designer community, we want to have a strong focus on this workshop, and we have people that are awesome facilitators, and maybe it's not the typical strength of enterprise architects. So that's maybe one the phase where I think enterprise architects can improve. It's not true for everybody, but myself, I'm really a weak facilitator, and I'm not good in drawing on flip charts. I need to learn, right? So the designers probably need to learn architectural thinking and analytical thinking and thinking with more the rational brain. And we should learn to better think in this more artist-like, yeah, and it's more about storytelling and communication, and all the soft factors come together in this co-design phase. And what we do have in this co-design phase, we bring in the maps from these various disciplines, as I showed you before. So the big challenge is to understand what is the design challenge. That's the research phase. And then you set up a series of workshops where you say, okay, which maps, what is the outcome of those workshops? Is it a capability map? Is it a journey map? Is it a product redesign? Or is it all of them? Is it a combination? So how broad shall we look at this design challenge? And of course, you need interdisciplinarity in these spaces. And I once said, I think the only thing enterprise designers can really design are negotiation spaces. So we will come up with a certification for enterprise design practitioner. And what he really designs are spaces where you have the right people with the right maps at the right point of time. But he doesn't need to have all this knowledge in the business side that people have. So think of it as more as a facilitation, maybe coaching discipline. Yeah, and then we go to the center, right? And whenever I show this slide on the left side, people from the agile world, business agility, they tell me, I'm old school. That's a board. Board are bound to die. We don't want it. We are autonomous, right? And that's the right side. And I'm not sure, right? Maybe it's more about finding out how much governance you need in a certain context, right? So our take here is more, it's not either or. We don't need to battle. Are boards here to stay? Do we need hierarchies anymore? There's a lot of buzz going on in this org design community. We don't really care about that. And there's a lot, of course, the fad of the decade of the century might be the agile stuff with all the autonomous team and scaled agile frameworks. Yeah, power to the people, that's good, and works to a certain degree in certain context. But I'm not sure if an autonomous team will ever decide a huge, if we will merge with bank A, B, or these huge decisions are here to stay, at least that's what we think. Yeah, but at the end, we want to provide tools in the toolkit that help people make better informed decisions. So management instruments, we will have dashboards. So these good old SWOT-like dashboards, probably based on capabilities, capability-based planning. Yeah, I'm fighting hard to include it in the toolkit. At the beginning, the designers were not so happy with that, because they said, well, that's old school. These are boxes. These are clear governance. These are capabilities. Oh my God, that's structures. And I said, yes, that's structure. Yes, it's structure. And you are autonomous, but within certain boundaries. And it's more about defining the boundaries of making the right decisions. It's not saying, well, we are autonomous and we are anarchist and let's do whatever we want to do. We are agile, right? It's about finding the right balance between them. There's a lot of fat and a lot of misunderstanding between the strategic management community and the agile community. We don't want to get in the middle of this battle. We don't really care about. What we will do is we will have tools that enable better informed decisions by both teams. So you can decide if you have more or less autonomy. I'm fine with that. But at the end, please show me where are your strategic directions located on your capability map. Where do you want the elephant to improve? That's the strategic direction, and that's the small little bubbles there. So that's this typical capability-based planning that can be important. But of course, we also need to empower teams. And we need to connect with investment processes. That's the reason why investing in change. If enterprise design, like enterprise architecture, is not so much connected with the finance guys where the big investment decisions are being made, it's nowhere, because they make decisions not based on our maps, and we want to change it with the management instruments of our toolkit. Yeah, and then it comes to the realization phase. And when I look at what's in Scaled Agile framework, for example, this pipelining and Scrum of Scrum, Scaled Agile. So what they seem to do, they go to this big room and do this pipelining here on the left side, and they have 10,000 of stickies. And I always was curious to see, okay, where's the structure? How are your requirements, your user stories? How are they related to the enterprise? Why do you think that this is important to implement this epic? And typically, it's not traceable. So you have a product owner and they follow the product owner blindly. And if the product owner says, yes, I want this epic, I want these and user stories, they implement it. But nobody really knows if this 100,000 € I invest in a certain feature is really related to the capability map, for example, to the business architecture of the elephant, and to the strategic direction. So it's a typical, many people complain there's no traceability between strategy and execution, and I would probably agree. Yeah, but the layer and Business Architecture Guild tries to achieve it, and I know that many wants, but it doesn't really work. It doesn't seem to work because the Agile community, they don't like enterprise architects a lot. Yes, enterprise architects in Scaled Agile framework, it's not my understanding of enterprise architecture. It's technology, but that's a different topic. Maybe this phase is one of the most challenging one, because you must align thousands of people, developers, product owners, business people that are so driven by short-term solutions and coming up with the product and everything for the customer tomorrow, short-term, and they're following the product owner. And now we come and say, well, the product owner is not so important. The customer, yeah, it is also important, but please have a look at the whole enterprise, and please ensure that it stays adaptive and structure and modularization, architecture principles. That's really, they don't like us to say it. Yeah? And I gave up. I did it as an enterprise architect. Nobody listened, because they said, yeah, Wolfgang, you're right. We should refactor. We should get rid of those systems, but we don't have the time. We don't have the money. And then they kept on botching, and the landscape growth and growth. You know the story. That's the reason slide number 1 has happened. So we believe the only way to make this happen is a shared understanding. Why is it important? That's where this purpose comes into play. A common vision. If the C-suite and the top level management says, yes, we invest in us, we invest in enterprise-wide thinking, we invest in our enterprise architecture, and people know why, and that's well communicated, that's the only way it will ever happen, because otherwise everybody is so driven by those solutions. Yeah, in the final phase, it's the reuse phase. There are very interesting approaches coming from the designer side. So there are design systems. That's quite alien for me. If you never heard it, you can Google it. Designs, that's interesting. But think of it as guiding principles and recurring patterns. Yeah, we have these architecture principles in Toga, for example, and everybody has those principles. That's valuable, right? Because that's reusable. And you can have components, reusable components, the idea from software architecture. I mean, we don't have solutions for all of that, of course, but with this phase right now, we say it's a clear yes to reuse, because reuse is important for adaptivity and for better enterprise at the end, for a better architecture of the enterprise. But there is a lot to explore, and there are some promising approaches from various disciplines. So maybe this will not be the most comprehensive part of the toolkit by end of this year, but let's see. Okay, so that completes the how and what's the toolkit. I just have 5 minutes about who we are. We've been founded half a year ago by Milan Günther and me. So we are the presidents of the Intersection Group, and we are a true not-for-profit association. So maybe what we want to achieve can only be achieved as a not-for-profit association, because that's the only way why those awesome people connect to us and want to become advising members. We have 70 of them. And usually these are guys with 10 or more books written and so on. Really, really big names. Martin Mocker is there, and Tom Graves, and Naomi Stead. Awesome stuff. And the reason why this works is that we say, yeah, bring in your knowledge, and we don't commercialize it. So we have a mission to create this wisdom, that's where we are, and to spread it, the wisdom on how to create better enterprises. And the toolkit is maybe our most important means to do that. We have an existing community. Yeah, and maybe the even more exciting here is that we are already really interdisciplinary. So in recent months, people from organizational design, from brand design, industry experts, right? And many, of course, many product designers, experienced designers join. So I would estimate that at the current moment, we are only 1/3 of enterprise or business architects, right? This typical IT architect field. We are 30%, and that's okay. And the strength is those community is this interdisciplinarity. And whenever we have a discussion between how to connect a process from business architecture with a journey, or how can we teach a product designer why modularization is important? How can we teach him architectural thinking? Then we invite a workshop and bring him the people, and it usually takes 1 year until they understand. So that's really tedious. You need a year. That's because everybody is so in his silo, that this shared understanding and bridging this gap is really a challenge, but it's an ongoing process. It's in our DNA. We have structures where we set up this meeting and connect with the goal to come up with concepts that work for us and for all of us. Yeah, so that's, as mentioned, we will publish it, the Intersection Toolkit, by end of this year as open source, so you can download it for free, maybe for a small amount of money, we are not sure, but pretty cheap. And the business model, the idea is to make some money by training. So on the right side, you have learning and knowledge. And of course, we will set up these certified courses where people pay. And of course, we need to create this content, and this year will be version 1.0. But with the money we get from selling the training, we will pay authors to write books, for example. So nobody will get rich, and that might be a really innovation, because if you have a look at Open Group or Scaled Agile and all these communities are for profits, and that's maybe a problem in itself. And yeah, and so that's the idea. We also run a conference. It will be in September in Stockholm. Let's see, probably remote. It's a pity, but it's called Intersection Conference. You can stay tuned. Of course, we will market it on our webpage, and there's a LinkedIn group, Intersection Group, where we'll publish it too. And at the beginning, there was only the community. So when I joined with Milan, it was a community of people discussing in a Slack. And I said to Milan, well, that doesn't work. We need to produce it. You can discuss forever. I want to write a book. And then we started 1 year ago, we started to write this pattern book where we brought together the knowledge of this community. And maybe we laid the foundation of this discipline. So what you find in there, 35 patterns, it's really a lightweight book. So it's not much to read, but it's the result of half a year of tough work with 40 people and condense it to the core. What is the pattern behind? The pattern in the book, they are not discipline specific. They work for enterprise architects. They work for product designers. So they are multi-purpose if you want. Yeah, and you can buy it on Enterprise Design Patterns. I have the final advertisement soon. And we will have the certified training as mentioned before. Yeah, so we are also doing webinars. So if you are interested, you can get in contact with us using our LinkedIn group. And we have 2 or 3 webinars a month only where we talk about the patterns and why they are cool. So that's for us also an important means to get in touch with the community, to present our content and to get discussions. So these webinars are always awesome to learn from the feedback and make stuff better over time. Yeah, but if you're interested, buy it on enterprisedesignpatterns.com, because then Jeff Bezos doesn't get 50%, so we get 100% of the revenue. That's really, we know that. Yeah, I think that completes the presentation. And I would love to have some discussions, and would love to see many of you connect to our LinkedIn page, because we are pretty active there.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Wolfgang. I think the right thing to do now is take a short break, so everyone can grab a cup of coffee.
Beer is okay.
You have coffee. So let's be back in 5 minutes or so.
Okay.
Yes, and then we'll do the Q&A.
Cheers.
Cheers. Are you you're taking a beer?
Of course. You need good answers.
Maybe it's a good time to stop sharing your screen so people can
Yes.
see each other. So now comes the interesting part.
Sure.
Okay, so I think most people are back, hopefully. And we can just look at the chat and see what the questions are. I know that Jan van Bon has posed quite a lot of questions, so he can start the questionnaire. But so Jan, maybe you can also, you have your camera turned on.
I have.
Maybe you can start asking your own questions.
I think I'm almost the only one with any questions at all.
Yeah. So shall we time box you then, Jan? Or
please do, but maybe we should first get some other questions because this will be a very lonely enterprise.
Let's we'll say we time box you in 10 minutes then.
My most basic question, of course, would be if you want to take us along an architecture journey. In my view, architecture starts with principles. So where are your principles? Until now, I haven't seen anything about, except for a lot of discussion about what's coming up and how wonderful and great it is going to be, but I haven't seen anything yet. So my question is, where are the principles that this whole story starts with? Make them explicit.
Yes.
Otherwise I can't follow.
I agree. They are there. Maybe they are not explicit enough. That could be so, but I absolutely agree that you need some principles. But I think a company must define it based on the design challenge at hand, right? So if you do enterprise architecture, strategic architecture stuff, then you need these typical architectural principles.
So how can you start a story without explaining your architecture principles? That's what architecture is all about.
Yeah, but maybe for us it's more important to start with this exploration phase. So what's the problem all about? If you don't understand the problem, maybe you are not able to define the principles well enough.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, you are starting with the problem and then trying to find a solution. Exploring the problem and then going towards a solution instead of starting from the principles and going towards the design.
I think that the principles are depending on the context. Yeah, the principles that work for company
depending on the context. That's nice.
To be honest, at the same thing, because we have also principles in our company, but the principles are related to the company, so to our context. So I more or less agree with Wolfgang that we have a general approach. You need principles. I totally agree with you, Jan. But it is a subset of it. And you have to create your own context and your own principles.
Yeah. Maybe
But can't you say, sorry, Wolfgang, can't you say that there are some principles behind the toolkit, or at least the book itself? I mean, I read the book, so there are patterns, that's what you call them, but if you read through them, there are some higher level thoughts within them, you could say.
Yes, yeah, it all depends on what you understand as principles. So you can have principles at various levels for various situations. So they depend on the kind of concept you want to come up with. I absolutely agree. And what we will have are values for intersection group, but that's more about we as an enterprise, what are our principles, how we do operate. So for me, this term principles, it's not well enough defined that you can say, well, what are our principles, and then start the co-design. It's more, what kind of company are we looking at? And because you can have various design challenges, and one could be, Milan does that quite often, you have a startup and they just have an idea of a product and they need to set up everything, the brand and the architecture, the IT and so on. So that's a holistic enterprise design you must do. And then the exploration can be a market scan, for example. And then you start with the product model, and then you have principles for good product design. And then you have this typical, what is our USP and so on. So it all depends on this design challenge. For us, this loop, it's not valid for this only for this major old economy existing big banks, yeah, where we quite often come from. It works also in various scenarios. So of course, you must understand what is the design challenge and what constraints do you have? What's your mandate, maybe?
But in general, I'd say, oh, sorry.
I was looking for some principles behind the idea of quote, quote, architectural thinking. Do you have some principles of your own? Of course, I understand that principles can be company specific, although I do believe that many of the principles would be generic by nature.
Yeah.
But the idea is, what are the principles behind the thing you come up with, the architectural thinking phenomenon, let's call it that.
Exactly, yeah, we are working on exactly that, and we have a workshop this Saturday with all the members. Right now we call it values. Yeah, you write what our values, and then probably we will derive behaviors. How do we behave to achieve these values, and what are our principles? So I think that's all related, yeah. And there are some ideas for us. Example, if you want to have a value, I don't know if it's a principle. We believe in beauty. So that will be one cornerstone. All of our maps must be beautiful because that's the only way where people connect. That's one thing. One thing is simplicity. We will drill down to the very core of a concept. So we will take TOGAF, for example, and we will condense it from 900 to 70 pages. I don't need more to describe enterprise architecture. And so that might also be a principle. Maybe it's a value, I'm not sure, but yes, I agree. If you want to have it for intersection group, it's important to have it also for the members, that they have this mission and this vision, but that's an ongoing process.
I'm just, let's say, a bit surprised by the fact that you are saying that you need beautiful pictures and you will be working on principles, but you are already just explaining to us the beautiful products that you will design without sharing the principles that will be used to design them. I'm just a little bit, let's say, confused. That's not what I'm used to. Talk about that.
Maybe the reason is that it's unfinished. So that the core concepts are presented, they are quite stable. It's a result of 1 year of discussion, and we have another 10 months to go. I absolutely agree. It's just a sign that we're not there.
The design and the characteristics of the results that you are going to share with us. I've done an academic education, and I graduated on Bluff. I think you could have done the same.
Well, if you look at TOGAF, then it's no rule that you start with the principles. You have to do principles at some time, but it's not a requirement that you do it up front. What I find interesting is that I was caught on the wrong foot by this. That I have always thought that enterprise design was smaller than enterprise architecture, but actually it's much bigger. So enterprise architecture is only, we'll say, 1/6 of the whole enterprise design. And now I see the whole context much better.
Yeah.
There was another question. That was the question about, is design a component of architecture? Or how do you see that?
We've been discussing this for 2 years until we gave up. So it depends what kind of literature you read. So if you look at artists and building design and architecture, there are some definitions.
That's about what you think.
Yeah, what I think, so I like this IEEE definition of architecture, right? So it's the elements and relations, the system that is embodied in elements and relations, and that stuff is that's this architecture. That's what comes to mind. But Milan, in one discussion, came up with one sentence I would subscribe to, and he said, design is how it feels and architecture is how it works, and you can't really separate those two things. So beauty, for example, is an attribute of good architecture and design. It's about feeling and how it works, and you can't really separate the feeling from how it works, like on the iPhone, right? It's not only beautiful, it also works like hell, and you can't separate them. And that's where we stop this discussion. And the reason why we don't want to go with enterprise architecture anymore is that we think it's like burnt earth. I don't know if this is English. So not many people outside the tiny ivory tower love us. So they say, whenever I go in the room and say, I'm the enterprise architect, they perceive me as IT. And that's the reason why we try to rebrand, and we don't want to use enterprise architecture as a term. We call it architecture as part of enterprise design.
Okay, maybe we can look at other questions here. I have a question from Bart Nundulk. To what extent are the core elements in the meta model validated in one way or the other?
Validated against one way, or okay, validated in a way. So how has it been created? For architecture, I started with architectural thinking 3 years ago. And what I did was I condensed my experience after 13 years of enterprise architecture, so my personal from one person, and I discussed it with some friends in enterprise architecture, because the driver was, how can we make something like Archimate with 35 elements and TOGAF and these huge bloated models? What's the core? What is the core we need to be successful with enterprise architecture that is teachable to the business side? So that's what that was the motivation. And so it's the result of 13 years of practice and the result of 1 year of discussion with the designers. So I think that the model, the architectural part of the model is good if our interdisciplinary community buys it. I'm not so keen to discuss with them, with the enterprise architecture community anymore. When you post on LinkedIn, what is a capability, what is a function, then you have some people, you might know their names, and you have so long list that it's an academic difference between a capability and a function. And what's the difference between a service and an interface? And is it a business service? You know, we are nerds, to be honest, right? So I'm also coming from this nerdy world. We need, and that's what we are doing, we need to reduce it to the absolute minimum, to the essence. And the essence is reached once disciplines start to understand each other. Then we know that we are there. If we do it the other way around, then we end up with something like TOGAF, right? So that's designed by committee, 900 pages, 1,000 pages, and things grow. And we will go the opposite direction.
But then the question was for me. I understand what you're saying, but then again, it's the meta model, if you apply it to a certain situation, certain organization, whatever, or a corporation of any kind, then you would start to make your own sort of meta model for every situation, because in every situation you have a different language, different grasp of words and the meaning of the words. So it makes it very difficult to have one set of bare minimum of elements, because in the end, you will always get the discussion you're trying to avoid.
I'm not so sure. Maybe there can be two reasons. So it can be a terminology issue. So in some companies, people call processes value streams. That's an ongoing battle, right? I never understood the concepts of value stream. We just omit it. We say, okay, there are two concepts. We don't need both. Let's go with processes. It's much more major than value streams. You can discuss. Yeah? And if there's a company where it's common and people are familiar with value streams, feel free to rename it. And maybe there can be a dictionary. So that's one approach, right? Mm-hmm. And the other thing is we are maybe optimistic enough to believe that we will be a kind of a standard in the next 5 years or so. So what we want to see is that people love to connect to our toolkit disciplines and align their toolkit like a magnet. Yeah? If it's cool enough, like the iPhone, right? Nobody needs to market an iPhone. Everybody loves to connect, and people implement applications based on that. And we want to have exactly that effect. It must be cool like hell and beautiful like hell, and discipline will align. And that's the vision.
Do you have like a more detailed meta model that you can show us, or?
This was this design challenge IT. So in the IT space, we have applications as the focal point that are related to processes, and it was this design challenge. Well, I can show it again.
That one slide you had. Okay, you don't have more detail than that. What you already
we don't need more than 5 elements for IT architecture. Of course, if you are coming from a software world, you might go deeper, right? You have a CMDB and you have servers and network. Okay, that's okay, right? Mm-hmm. As long as your stuff connects to application, and that's where many companies struggle. They don't have a single focal point. It's application, and you need technology and you need servers. Of course, you need that, but that's obvious and trivial, right? And you can connect it to our meta model. So feel free.
Application is the main term you say on the IT side.
Yes.
And so in Archimate, we have like application components. So
yes, I know.
So you say application is a better concept. Or?
It's just a simpler term, right?
Okay.
It's just a question. So where's my meta model? So the process how do we define this meta model? We always want to go for simplicity. So if our brand designers in the group understand the term application and are puzzled by the term application components, we go with application, even if there is a small semantic difference. Of course, it's a bit of a difference. Yeah, but I think we don't want to fall into the same trap as TOGAF has fallen, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I know it's tough for enterprise architects that we say, no, I can do it with 5 or 6. I can do everything. I don't need application services, business services, functions, capabilities. You know, Archimate has 35 elements, and I've discussed with Mark Lankost recently. Mm-hmm. He's also not really happy. And we cannot teach people Archimate. We cannot teach people outside the architecture space all the meta modeling, the hundreds of relations. So we need to go with simplicity.
Yeah. Well, what I see is that you focus to understandability for the whole organization, and instead of rigorous definitions for the architectural community.
Yes.
The same is that also indeed as an architect, you need to be able to communicate to various groups. You can communicate versus the architectural community, and then you maybe take more components and have more specific definitions, but then you lose your audience in the business side. Therefore, you take maybe just a picture with the most simple objects that still can be understood, and that is enough to have enough complexity to do justice to the reality. But every schematic is a simplification. Even the architectural complex overviews are still simplifications, abstractions, but more rigorous, satisfying the real architectural, the fanatic architects.
Yes, maybe that's the different mindset. For us, this part is more of a communication thing.
Yeah.
These abstractions, it's about beautiful maps that people co-create. It's not so much that the enterprise architect has studied 900 pages of TOGAF and run 50 Archimate certificates and so on. So it's getting out of this ivory tower and taking off the crown and say, well, I'm only one of a fool. I'm a facilitator. I'm a fool. The experts are in the business side. So let's facilitate. So let's bring them in and let them model their capabilities. We must be humble enough to understand that the true wisdom is in the business experts. We as enterprise architects, we are fools. I mean, they are also fools. Every discipline is a fool. I like to say that, right? But the only way to come up with an enterprise design that works is to do it collaboratively. And as a consequence, if you want to do it collaboratively, you must reduce the number of concepts. And it simply does not work. And I can't explain to nobody what is the difference between a business function and a business service and an application service and application for, you know, all these 35 elements in Archimate. That doesn't work, right?
Yeah. Indeed, yes.
Yeah, I hear a very clear principle and I agree with it.
So what's the principle then?
They're all fools.
Make architecture simple and understandable by everyone or by all stakeholders and not only the IT guys.
Yeah. I
Don't
agree.
invent your own language.
Well, I don't think that they do really invent much, because I recognize a lot of concepts that are also put in the argument and things like that. Maybe just slight differences but also the people using argument have also discussions about you have to use a function or a service or things like that. So that rigorous, it is still also not there. And I think that if this understandable enough, I think that it serves its purpose.
I wonder, just thinking about this, is I work in a municipality, and Archimate slides and maps are not really feasible to use in a municipality. They don't even know what Archimate is. So you need to talk to them in plain, normal, in our language, Dutch. But what me concerns is, okay, working together in a group with more disciplines. So from the business side, from legal point of view, from IT maybe. It also needs to get a detailed knowledge of understanding of each other's worlds. How do you work together? What is it in for me? And you explain it in the picture. But my concern is there a way in this methodology how to achieve this? Because we can try to teach each other things and learn from each other, but how do we get really everybody's real pain points?
Yeah,
that is a real problem, because I can teach everything what I can do, but when they don't listen or they don't have anything, they are not related to you, then it stops.
Yeah.
And then
I think that the magic happens in this co-design phase. And if you manage to bring in 10 people, 5 people from various disciplines and let them collaboratively design a capability map. I've done that, for example, with business people. And after this workshop, I was three months on vacation, and they continued their design, so they owned it. For me, this was this never happened to me. So I gave it this diagram, a simple capability model, and after my vacation, it was changed and it was a perfect capability map. They owned it because I made it simple in the way. And the same happened to me for information objects. So they owned that data governance, right? So they owned known they are information entities. And if you teach them, well, the bubbles are information entities, they are related, that they are not, they can understand that. It's much easier for them to understand architecture than it is to understand their business. They've been running for decades. You know,
then you are very lucky in the organization where you did this, because my experience is that in my organization, what I even teach them, the most simplest slides, they don't understand. So they don't go to do it by themselves, never. And what me concerns is in the municipality, maybe government in general, people don't want to change. And this has everything to do with change.
Yeah.
So are you in the municipality of Amsterdam?
No. A neighbor,
okay.
where Schiphol is situated.
Okay, now they are introducing Enterprise. They might be an early adopter of our toolkit, Amsterdam.
But Attila, is this not the same discussion as how can we adopt agile within organizations? Because
exactly, it's the same discussion. Exactly the same discussion. I believe in multidisciplinary teams. I really believe in them. But you need to have a common ground to work together. And when there are groups that are miles ahead in their heads in thinking, and some groups are thinking, now I'm doing my business and nothing has to change. And it's a very difficult challenge to get this done, to work together.
Yeah. There are constraints, of course. There are cultural constraints, there are legacy constraints, and you must be aware of these constraints. Also in our book, this politics theme, this how to position, how to build relations to people is very strong. So if you understand your context, and it's also a pattern in the book, we have a leaf pattern there. So if you're frustrated, there are companies where it will never work. So if nobody wants to think enterprise-wide, it doesn't work. It's as simple as that. And it works best if you have the buy-in by highest possible management. We all know that. We always want to get it. So if a company does not want to optimize enterprise, it won't optimize the enterprise. If you are the only one who wants to do it, you will fail.
Yeah, I was in Switzerland last week or 2 weeks ago, and for a canton. And they have the same problems. There are different directions, directoraten with their goals, and if they don't have shared goals, then it's really difficult. But that's the whole point. And but that is also true for commercial companies. Sometimes you have business units that don't want to cooperate, and if there is no value, then there is no value, and then it stops.
Yeah.
Okay, I saw another question. I don't know if Robert Slachter is still there.
Yes, still there. I wanted to talk a bit about the elephant in the room.
Yes.
The elephant map that you were showing earlier. I was a bit afraid it would become a Frankenstein monster if you tried to incorporate all these concepts from different perspectives. And at the same time, you're talking about beauty and simplicity. So, and for me, there is a reason why you actually chose an elephant picture here and not something real and existing. So I would really like to hear from you. Do we really need this elephant map? I understand from where you want it to be, but my question is actually, do we need a human readable elephant map?
For me, this is it's like Google Earth. Yeah, so you open your mobile phone, you start Google Earth, and then you see the globe. That's the elephant, and then you have a 3D model where you can zoom in and you can rotate and you can filter, and then you can see. Let's have a look at the eye. That's maybe a capability. So for me, this elephant is very much about a beautifully designed capability model, and I've done that. So this shared understanding, what are we capable of doing? What are our strengths and weaknesses? If you model them right, business people can handle them. And then the other models are related and connected. So you can make a double click on the ear and say, I want to focus on a certain aspect. Let's have a look about which customer journeys are connected to these capabilities, or which information entities does the ear need to hear, for example. And it's all a matter of rotating, drilling down, drilling up, and so on. And really, we do have the vision to have this also ready in a tool that is similar to Google Earth. Because this shared understanding is vital for the whole approach. You can only design enterprises collaboratively if people have a shared understanding of what it is now and what it should be. And then you have this current elephant and maybe the envisioned future elephant for some reason, and so on. And it all starts with a shared understanding. And we believe that it's possible if we drop maybe many meta model elements in Archimate or so. People don't understand. So people do understand what I show you there. They understand processes. It's a well understood concept. They understand capabilities and applications aside. They understand journeys already. So there are for sure maps. They understand org chart. They understand it.
So it's just an architecture repository then.
Yes, it's a landscape.
Yeah, it is a landscape, but maybe the primary category is beauty and simplicity. And I don't see that a lot. So if you talk about capabilities, if you open your browser and Google capability maps, you will find the most ugly stuff around in the internet. So the alignment is weak. You can do it now. So the alignment is weak. The font is weak. The terminology is weak. Everything is called management. It's not business term, yeah, right? And that's where the problem starts. And in the book, we have a pattern that is called natural language. So always use the language of the business. Don't impose your semantically precise architect's language.
Okay, but you agree, Wolfgang, that when you have a landscape and you can objectify, but because you just said that processes, capabilities, applications are well-defined concepts. I cannot imagine that somebody in higher management is going to debate with me what an application is, but probably within the IT department, it will. But it doesn't matter. But there are concepts in organizations like leadership that are a little bit difficult to define. So leave them out. Put all kinds of very harsh and very clearly defined concepts in your repository, and let everything else out of it, because it only clouds every discussion. But you agree that the repository is needed.
Yeah, of course. It's a good idea to have a repository. What I do, if there's no repository, I use Wiki. I use a Confluence Wiki. I was most successful.
It doesn't matter what kind of tool
you
use.
But of course, you have these relations. You say, okay, that's the ear of the elephant. And then you dive deeper. Then you see the processes needed for the ear and the data. So this relation, that's where architecture comes into play, right? But it only works if you focus on the essential concepts. And it's tough. That's absolutely right. We discussed it in our communities. We've had heavy battles coming up with processes instead of value streams, because there's a trend. For example, that was one of our battles, right? And shall we call it applications or application components like in Archimate? And if we are in doubt, we take the simplest possible and we take the teenager test. So I try to explain it to my son. He's 18 now, and if he understands what the process is, he understood it in an instance. He understood was an information of it. He did not understand what a value stream is or a business service or something like that.
Put this allowance into the concept. Maybe it works.
So is it, Wolfgang, a repository of pictures or a repository of elements?
Both.
Both.
There is a clear meta model behind it. Of course there is, right? It's the same as you have in every enterprise architecture tool. You have a repository and the relations, and you have maps you can generate out of it. That's true. Typically the stuff the tools create today are ugly. I don't know many tools, and that's the reason why I started to use Wiki, to be honest. And I do all the layouting by myself. That can be really exhausting and arduous, right? That can be, but the tools never. At least 5 years ago, it was the last time I used such a tool, and then I used Confluence a lot because it fosters this collaborative information gathering. I want to have clear ownerships, and somebody is accountable for filling in the application attributes. That's the only way how you can keep data up to date. You must have a clear vision. People must know why they are doing it, because they have a certain benefit, or the enterprise has a benefit. It does not work if an enterprise architecture department goes from one office to the next and runs interviews. It's outdated in 2 months' time.
Okay, I'm looking at the time. So we're sort of run out of the schedule we had beforehand. Is there maybe one final question by someone? No final questions. Then, okay. Then I'll take the last words, and thank you very much, Wolfgang, for your presentation. So I thought it was very interesting and a new way of looking at things. So I hope that you have, made some new enthusiasts for your methods, for your ideas. Can you share the presentation with the group?
Yeah, sure. We'll send to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, well, that's it for now then.
Okay,
well,
thanks for having me. It was really a pleasure. I always like to discuss those topics. And it feels really differently if you present for enterprise architects or for people from other disciplines. That's really amazing, because some discussions you have only by enterprise architects. And it's a totally different story when you tell it to product designer or UX people. And then that's the amazing part of my job. And thanks for the tough questions. I always get tough questions and we don't have all the answers. And please stay tuned, maybe on LinkedIn, connect to us, and then you get updates. Stay tuned. End of this year, we will publish a first version.
Right? Okay, well, thanks everyone.
Thank
That's
you.
it for now.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.